I had 5 different jobs since college. Every single company I worked at had been bought out. Then Craig Grabner, who was PR for the Chicago Board of Trade, he used to work with me at JP Morgan, moved over to the Board of Trade, told me about the job opening for managing director of marketing. And I was so excited after I got the position. It was a smaller company. It was what I was looking for. I loved all the people. Then again, like 5 weeks later, after I had joined, Bernie Dan, the CEO of the Chicago Board of Trade at the time, called a small group of us in their conference room and was like, we have this, I think it was $8 billion offer from the Merc as an acquisition. And, you guys are going to be the merger team. And it's like, you've got to be kidding me. That very second, it was like the corporate gods whispered in my ears, you are not meant to be in corporate America. Literally right then and then, I took out a pad of paper and started writing down every single thing every single person said. I knew enough at that point, even though I'd only been there 5 weeks, to know that like the Board of Trade and the Merc had always been like this for 100 years. And I'd known all my previous experiences. Like, it's never easy. And so then when you have that much history, there's definitely going to be drama. So I was like, oh, this is going to make a great story.
Did you have a style on which you based the writing of the book?
Absolutely. It was Michael Lewis, Liar's Poker. He's always been like one of my writing heroes. And I loved how he did his book in the first person, kind of a narrative nonfiction is what they call that. His book was, I think, he had graduated from Yale and then went to go work, at investment banks and kind of was a insider's look at, that was really the heyday, like the 80s investment bank culture. And I've loved all of his books since as well, but he's never been, a character himself. And so I thought that would be a good model to go from.
What was your goal with the book?
One thing I found extraordinarily both fascinating, but also troubling was that, I had 2 business degrees. Most of my friends have business, MBAs, like everybody works in finance, be it, venture capital or private equity or investment banking or just banking, whatever. When I said that not only was I interviewing at the Board of Trade, and then when I actually got the job, none of these extraordinarily, what I call way smarter than me people knew what the exchange was, or really what futures were, or the industry or whatever. And I was like, that's weird. Like, that's weird. Why is that? And so, and it was the type of thing where, my family never knew what I did. Nobody knew what the Board of Trade did. I think a lot of people knew scenes from like Ferris Bueller's Day Off or this trading floor and whatever, but most people still associated that with like stock trading and understood that. Nobody understood like what exchanges themselves were or futures. And so one of my goals was just to kind of, like roll back the curtain on that and be like, explain it in a way that what I call a normal person could understand. So not necessarily for anybody already in the industry, but really trying to simplify it for, I always said, if my mom understands this after, then I've done my job. I might not have done my job there, but it is really complicated. And I wanted to just try and explain, one, what exchanges do, and then 2, kind of what futures are and what the industry is, for the average person, really, because also, I mean, when you come to understand how much of our daily lives are affected or at the very least, influenced by what goes on at these exchanges, it's like monumental. It's wrapped up into our everyday lives. I also, it was funny. There's a guy who's in the book. He was an economist at the Chicago Board of Trade. One of my favorite people is named Fred Sturm. And he thought it was interesting that I was writing it having come from, the acquiree side, the Chicago Board of Trade side, because he said history is usually written by the winners, right? And so it really was meant to be kind of a love letter to the Board of Trade, and capture that incredible moment in time, the people that were involved in it, uncomplicated as much as I could.
What did you think this book was going to do to your career?
I wouldn't have done it if I really felt like I wanted, I guess a future in the industry, in the sense of like getting a job where I was going to go into day to day. I knew it was a big risk, but at the same time, I never had any ill intent, like it was always, and I hope I proved that with the book. I mean, it was really meant to, this was an extraordinary story and it needed to be told. And I wanted to, like I said, capture this moment in time, kind of solidify, kind of the, a lot of these legends of trading and of the industry. I guess I knew that I could never work with probably anybody again that knew that I wrote a book where, like, in retrospect, they knew I was writing down everything, single thing they said for a year. But, again, in the end, I hoped that everybody would be happy that it was done and that, it's part of the record now. It was definitely a surprise to a lot of people. I mean, that was probably the most nervous I've ever been in my entire life, to call everybody, because I mean, over a year had gone by since I'd talked to anybody, purposely not talking to anybody, because I knew what I was doing in the background. And I knew I had taken all these notes every single day. And I had also, it's funny about when you think back about how many trees we killed at the Board of Trade, but like every single day they would go around and give us this packet of like all the daily news for the industry. Your newsletter was always printed out, and in there, any headlines from any newspaper around the world were in there. And so I was just like keeping these packets, was like doing my work for me, having all this research laid out there. And then, I had like, there's lots of other books, kind of the industry. Leo had his book there that I looked at, and there was this great one that you can see. I have, all these, I was taking all these notes, but ultimately, like I said earlier, it wasn't going to be a great story if I couldn't interview the people that actually lived it. And so I had made up my mind. I was having a big party, February 2nd, 2010, for the season 6 premiere of the TV show Lost, which I loved. And I was like, I'm going to do it this day, because like I just want to be able to watch I just want to be able to watch my show and not worry about it tonight. And so the first person I called was Chris Malo, because he was my boss at the time. And he was like very freaked out, mostly worried about what Bernie would think. And I was like, this is, Bernie's like the hero, this is like a love letter. This is going to be, positive, whatever. And he was just kind of more wary, which, I mean, I get it. And again, it's like not anything that anybody expects when this person calls you out of the blue. It's like, hey, I'm writing a book and you're a character. And then weirdly enough, I called Bernie, and he was in the office with Maria Gemsky, who was PR for the Chicago Board of Trade. He put me on speaker, and then I was like, well, yeah, I'm writing this book and like you're the main character or whatever. And he was ecstatic. I mean, he was like, I love it. He's like, I think this is a story that's got to be told. I always wondered, why isn't anybody doing this? And he, offered up like all the things that he had been saving all along about it. So that was great. Then I waited a day before I called anybody at the Merc, which I started with Alan Schoenberg, who was their, PR rep at the time. He and I are friends now, but at that point, I think he was definitely a little bit like weirded out, and obviously, like, because of kind of all the bad blood there had been for 100 years, and I think he was like, how are you gonna paint us as an organization? But ultimately, in the end, everybody worked with me and interviewed with me, and it was really great. And of course, Jeff Sprecher loved it. More free publicity for him and kind of all his strategic moves. So yeah, it was. So I ended up spending hours and hours and hours interviewing everybody, yourself included, and filling in, all those gaps where I wasn't there. There were a few people that I think had originally worked at either the Merc or the Board of Trade and then ended up going to ICE, like working for ICE. And then they really got razzed when the book came out for like kind of stuff they had maybe said before about ICE when they weren't there. But, all in all, like I didn't have anything to be worried about in that.